Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the BaileyWiki channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes that you can use without any setup. And some of our scenes for Foundry Virtual Tabletop are going to be our backdrop as we explore 7 concepts and handy references that we use when automating Foundry with Monk's active tile triggers. We're also going to explore a really helpful reference tool that we've created in our free BaileyWiki Nuts and Bolts module. There's a lot of great stuff in there, whether you're using our premium content modules or not. So with that said, let's dive into some of the most useful things that we find ourselves taking advantage of all the time when we use Monk's active tile triggers. For all of the concepts we're going to discuss today, we have a really great reference tool available for you in our completely free BaileyWiki Nuts and Bolts modules. If you open up your Mass Edit prefabs and you go into the BaileyWiki folder, and you'll need to be either on the tile section or on the all section here, you can then find the folder for BW Nuts and Bolts Mass Edit prefabs. And then under Monk's active tiles, there is the MATT reference tile here. And just like any preset with Mass Edit, you can simply double click and you will spawn in a preview. And when you click it, you will place the tile. I've already got one in here, but then to get rid of this, we can go ahead and delete it. And this tile has all of the references we're going to be talking about. As you can see, it comes in with an instruction for double clicking for information. And it's going to give you a dialog box telling you a little bit about the tile. And if we bring in a test actor, we can demonstrate some of the other features here. For example, if I double right click, it is going to toggle the elevation of my character here from 10 feet and 0 feet. And it's also going to alternate mirroring and changing the tint of the tile here. When it comes to using the reference tile for building your own tiles, the first thing you want to do is you want to grab your artwork that you're going to be using. So I have this stair here, and I want this to be a proximity filter that also toggles the elevation of the actual entity here. So I'm going to go into my setup, and I'm going to set up all of the standard pieces here. So I want this to be on double click, and then it's important that we add in at least one action here. It doesn't really matter what it is, and then update that tile. Then we'll go into our Mass Edit prefabs, and again, inside of that BaileyWiki Nuts and Bolts Mass Edit prefabs folder, which is going to be in the tile section or under your global section. There's then a BaileyWiki Monk's active tiles folder where you can bring out that reference tile. And a great feature of MATT is that if we open up 2 tiles at the same time and we go to their action section under triggers, we can then actually drag those actions across to copy them. So I'm going to grab my proximity filter here, and we're going to remove our placeholder action. And then we'll go down and use the alter triggering token elevation as well. So when that's all good, we'll update this tile, and we'll bring in a test actor. Now, if this character is too far, nothing happens. But if we get closer, his elevation is going to toggle back and forth between 10 and 0. So you can use this with the reference tile to drag over these different sections to the tiles that you are creating. So it's super handy. You don't even have to copy and paste anything or get anything crazy with having to recreate these just by looking at it as a reference. You can drag them directly over. Just make sure if you're having trouble dragging things that you have at least one action already on your tile that you can drag things onto. Now that we've gone over the basics of using this reference tile, let's take a look at the first concept we're going to explore, and that's going to be auto landings. So it's going to be this first reference section, and you can see all of these are landings that begin with an underscore. If you go to create a landing in Monk's active tile triggers and you begin with an underscore, you can then start typing and it will give you a variety of options here. And this is going to be where Monk's active tile triggers automatically redirects you based upon that auto landing. So here we have different trigger methods, for example, manual activation versus double right click and double left click, giving us different results. As we saw earlier, if I go back to my token tools and I double left click, I get this dialog box. And if I double right click, I will instead be alternating the mirroring and the color of this tile, as well as alternating the height of my token here between 0 and 10 feet. There are a lot more auto landings than what are shown here, and there's also a reminder landing here telling you that there are more auto landings on the wiki. To access the wiki, we have that actually included right here. If you double click on the tile, you'll get the dialog box about the tile, and at the bottom we have a link to the GitHub for Monk's active tile triggers, which will bring you specifically to the wiki here. This is a really handy resource in general. We've covered this in the past in Automating Foundry, and it's just an amazing resource for sample tiles or learning more about specific actions, etc. One of the more important sections, or one of the things you may reference more, is in action flow, the landing section. We have everything on the auto landings down here and some additional information if you are interested in using that. To see some auto landings in action, we're going to take a look at our city waterworks sewer map here. I have a token and I'm going to advance them into this tile here, and we can see now this steam is visible and a sound plays. When we step out, then the steam is going to hide and the animation is going to end as well. When we open up the tile, we can then clearly see in the trigger section, we have when for both enter and exit, and then actions, we have that auto landing for enter. So everything beneath enter is going to fire whenever the enter trigger method is used, and that's going to be showing our steam, etc. And then our landing for exit is going to fire whenever we use the exit triggering method, and that's going to be turning off our traps. This is a pretty simple example, but you can make this substantially more complicated. You can also add in clicking actions, etc., or you can have different things based upon the person who's activating it, whether that's a player or a GM. Lots of potential when it comes to using auto landing, so again, check out that section on the wiki for all of the possibilities. We just have some of our favorites or the most common ones listed on the reference tile. Next up, we have proximity filters. This is incredibly helpful and incredibly useful in a variety of different applications. The main thing here is if you have some kind of clickable tile for your players that you don't want them to be able to activate from just anywhere in the scene. This makes a lot of sense for things like teleportation or for alternating their elevation, etc. And it's also useful for switches or levers that we don't want someone to be able to click on when they're 10 tiles away. We want them to actually be in range. So the way this one works is there's just a filter that is checking the tokens by distance, and you can configure this in a variety of ways, whether that is going to be less than or inside or within or greater than a certain distance. And then you can decide how you're measuring that from edge or the center, and you can decide whether to always continue or only continue if there are some tokens or all tokens within the distance. Then the check entity count here is an additional kind of stopgap here, so that if you have current tokens that are in fact within that radius, we're going to continue. If not, we're going to stop. This is also where if you decide to always continue, you would have a separate set of logic for if there were tokens that were not within the proximity, but you wanted to tell them something. So for instance, you could have a landing that says too far here, and then you could have a dialog telling them you're simply too far away. To see the proximity filter in action, we've popped over to the Magic Towers orrery here, and we have a switch that controls the orrery. And if I left click on it, you'll notice it says you are too far away. But when I get close enough, we'll get the sound playing. And we'll see then that the orrery activations all go through. You can also reset it by clicking on the switch. Returning to my GM view really quickly, we can take a look at the lever here, and we can see we've got the filter by distance, and then we're checking the entity count and going to an error section if none exist. In here for the error section, it's telling us that we're too far away and sending the info to the triggering player. There's some other concepts in here that we'll return to later on. One quick note here is I'm demonstrating the actual switch on a player vision, because if you have a token magic effect attached to a tile and you hide it, even if it's hidden from the player, you can see that these plants are still orbiting as a GM. So that's why I'm switching over to a player view there. Our next handy piece is going to be toggles. These are alter actions that are switching between two values. This is incredibly helpful for toggling things like elevation, as we demonstrated with our token earlier, and also for kind of UI style controls. So again, if we have Gomer here selected and we double right click, it's going to alternate his elevation between 0 and 10 feet. You'll also notice that if he has something outside of this, it will then force drop it to 0 as well. The way these work is there is an equation here where we're basically reading the value of the entity that we're affecting, whether it's the triggering token in the case of elevation or the tile in the case of changing our tint or scale. And then we're just checking to see if the entity elevation is between one of our two values, and if not, we're going to set it to a third value. In this case, it's the same as our 0. So it's checking, is it 0 or 10? If it's 0, switch it to 10. If it's 10, switch it to 0. If it's neither of those, switch it to 0. And then that same thing applies to things like the tint. And you have to do a little bit different formatting here using some of the quotation marks, since the tint value is actually a string in order to change between white and green in this case. But you can use any hex code for these values. And then for the scale, which is mirroring, we have the texture.scalex. You could also use scale.y in order to flip it vertically rather than horizontally. I've got these pulled out as separate examples here as well. So if you double click, you will switch between the two images here and the two colors. To see those in action, we can go to the Galleon Icebound here, where we have toggles that mirror when we are turning on and off lights and ambient noise. And then we can also check it out on the Modular Magnificent Mansion for the tint toggling here for this pet room that gets hidden or revealed based on whether this control tile is turned on or off. The last section of our tile specifically that we're going to take a look at is going to be alternating triggers. This works by using the trigger action for check entity count, and we're going to be looking for a specific tag. And then we can search for that either on our active scene, and with Monk's active tile triggers, active scene is maybe a bit of a misnomer. It's really the current scene that you're looking at, whatever scene you're on when you activate this tile. And then we have all scenes or a specific scene. In this case, I would generally recommend leaving it on active scene. It's the default, and it's going to be what you're using most of the time. And then we're just checking to see if the count is greater than 0, and if nothing exists, we're going to go to this odd landing. If there was more than 1, then we just continue down to this landing that's labeled even, and we importantly do not have the stop when reached in code toggle box ticked on. So that means we're going to continue into this. Then we have some notifications or whatever actions you want to do here. And then we're going to remove a tag here. We're using the alter tag action for this tile, and then we're removing this tag that is representing our even or odd state. In this case, we're using reference-even. In other places, you may have something like switch-even or switch1-even, etc. It doesn't really matter as long as you can follow the logic. And then we're going to remove it. This means that when we're done doing the things for the even actions, we're going to then reset ourselves and be in odd. You could also flip this and instead do odd for your first block and even for your second block. It doesn't really matter. We just like to be consistent by doing even, then odd. Then our other landing is going to be odd, and that's what we're getting redirected to with this check entity count if nothing has this tag on the scene. And this one does have the stop when reached in code, which is important because otherwise we would finish our even actions and then go right into our odd actions. Then this send notification is just a stand-in for our odd actions. And once we've completed those, we're going to be adding in the reference-even. So this is telling us that, okay, we've finished the odd, so next activation is going to be even. There's other ways to do this, but we find this to be the most robust and also the easiest to remember and work with. Important things to note here is all of these pieces are checking the tags for everything on the scene. So you want to make sure if you have multiple switches that you're using unique identifiers in order to keep them straight. As an example, down here, we actually have a tile set up to go through odd and even activation right here. See right now it's got the odd activation, so we should have the demo even tag applied so that our next activation is going to go to even. Then in actions, we're again using that check entity count, checking for the even tag, and if we have it, then we'll go through the even section where we are removing the tag and activating even light and removing odd light. And if we don't have the tag, then we'll go down to odd where we give this tile the tag, and then we do the opposite order on the lights. Back in our orrery, we can take a look at alternating triggers in action once again. So if I have my token selected and we're in range, we can left click on the lever and it's going to have the effect of toggling between the different orrery states. Back on the GM side, we can open up the tile and we can see here that we have the check entity count like we discussed before. We're looking for the tag, and if it doesn't exist, we're going down to our odd section where we are doing our odd actions and then also adding in the even tag so that the next activation is going to actually pass that first tag and go on. One important thing to notice with this particular setup is our odd landing here does not have stop when reached in code, and that's because we have the stop remaining actions for current tiles in this even section. So you can either do this double action thing where you have stop remaining actions followed by the landing for your odd block, or you can remove that and then hit the stop when reached in code on here and update that tile. Both will work. Then again, nope, we're just going through our actions for the even section. That's all the things that we want to happen on even activations, and then we're again removing that switch after we've done everything else. And you'll notice here that we are combining two different concepts, and you can do this with all of these different pieces. We have the filter by distance, and then we're doing alternating triggers. So you can loop these onto each other to make more complex tiles. These are just some of the most useful and most frequently utilized pieces that we use for amongst active tile triggers. That concludes the explicitly enumerated examples here, but let's talk about some principles that are also in action here and that you want to keep in mind when working with Monk's active tile triggers. As noted here, this uses alternating tile triggers and uses Tagger to do it, but it can also be used for multiple tiles to create really complex setups. As we discussed earlier, this is going to be looking for everything with the reference-even tag on the scene. So we can use that to then make sure there's a certain number of things with those particular tags, or we can also use it to search for tags that are on other tiles, not just the tile that we're working with. So let's take a look at that in action. Here we're back in the Magic Tower, this time in the airship hangar, and we have two levers here. The left one is going to open up the doors for the hangar, and then the right one is going to give us the option to actually launch the airship. Notice that when I close this, if I click on the lever to launch the airship, it's going to give me a dialog telling me that the hangar doors are still closed, instead of the option to launch or return the airship. Then when I actually launch it, we're doing a variety of different things where we are hiding different pieces and alternating images. So let's take a look at what all is happening here. So first we have the hangar door switch, and we're playing a sound file, and then we're switching the tile image, which when you have two images, you can also use this for alternating things rather than changing the texture source or doing the whole mirror scale option that we were exploring earlier. Then we're doing some other actions with changing the wall or door, but then finally we're toggling a particular tag for this tile here. So we are toggling the door switch tag on and off. So we can see right now the hangar door tag is applied, but not the door switch. So if we open it, we can see now it has door switch. On our launch lever here, we first have a check entity count where we are checking to see door switch. Now, obviously this tile does not have door switch. We are instead looking at the tile to the left of it. So you can use this to search for a variety of tiles and check out the tags that are applied to them in order to create more complex logic gates here. So here we're checking to see if there is at least one door switch tag on the scene, and if not, we're going to go to our closed section where we have the show dialog here. And that's just letting us know that the hangar doors are still closed. Assuming that there is a door switch, we're going to continue down to a show dialog where we're just asking, do we want to launch or return the airship? We can either do launch or cancel. And on a yes, we go to this launch section, and that's just a simple landing where we're playing some sounds, switching tile images, and then triggering this tile over here that is hiding these tokens. And then cancel is just done. So you can use this in a variety of different applications. Perhaps the most obvious and most interesting is with puzzles, where you can use this to check on multiple levers or multiple states at different points. There's a lot of different possibilities here, and I really encourage you to explore and tinker around with these to see what your favorite combinations are and how you can get some really cool results using this kind of nested tagging behavior. Keeping on the theme of using tagger here, there's also some really great applications in how indiscriminate tagger can be. Just like how we use that check entity count looking for a tag and use that to find all of the different things on a scene that had that tag, we can also use this to affect multiple things on the scene. And you saw a little bit of this in action already with some of our toggles like on the Icebound Galleon where we were turning things off. We can also use it for more granular controls here. So all of these tiles on this mansion are individual control pieces where we are doing different actions completely separately. We also have some master controls in the form of these floor-wide pieces, where we can change an entire floor, and also where we can change the entire mansion. And the way that this is working is we'll see that this is going to give us a dialogue, and then based on our answers, we're going to go to these different landings. So if we select the furnished landing, for instance, we're going to be triggering a tile, and it's going to be based off of a tag, and it's going to be mansion-2-control, and we're going to use the furnished landing. And we can see that for this whole upper floor, everything is tagged with mansion-2-control, and also this mansion master control. And within this, they all have the landings for furnished, empty, and ruined. Some of these also have additional landings for specific alternate rooms, like we saw earlier with the billiards room or the wizard's study. But they all have those same three core pieces. If we go down to our ground floor, we'll notice that it says Mansion 1 control and also Mansion Master control. And the basement is Mansion 0 control. When we look at the full Mansion control option, we have the Mansion Master control. So what we're able to do here is we're able to have much simpler mass controls by referencing everything with the same tag. So this is going to trigger indiscriminately everything that has the Mansion Master control tag to it, or the mansion whichever floor you're on control as well. And so you can also use this principle to apply a whole lot of different things. We can also see that when we are in the actual action economy here, where we're activating things by tag, we're alternating all of these different lights that we have going on. And so all of these lights are tagged with the same tag of Mansion 1C base light, etc. And so we can also use tagger for activating and deactivating multiple different things such as light sources or sounds rather than having to reference them individually, which is obviously one of the really powerful features of Tagger, but something that you really want to keep in mind and make as much use out of as possible when you are doing things with Monk's active tau triggers. Back in the orrery, the last concept we want to make sure we talk about here is going to be current tokens versus triggering tokens and how you need to consider those when you're doing your different actions. As we can see here with the lever, if we go to click on this while we're too far away, we're going to get the error message. If we open up the tile and we scroll down to the bottom here, we have this send notification. And this is saying show to the triggering player. And that's really important here because if we switch this to current users, and then we go and try to activate it, we're not going to get any pop-ups. Our tile didn't just break. Instead, what happened here is the current users is a number of 0, whereas the triggering player is always going to exist. And so this is that distinction between triggering and current. Your triggering players and tokens are always going to be the same no matter what. Once you've triggered the tile, then the triggering players and triggering tokens are captured, and that's going to be stored in this run-through of the actions. Nothing can change what the triggering token and triggering tile or triggering player are while you go through that. However, your current tokens and current users can change. At the very beginning, when you start, your current tokens and current users are going to be exactly the same as your triggering users and triggering tokens. Once you start filtering, that's when your current set of data starts to change. So first off, we have the filter here for filtering tokens by distance. And we're looking at those current tokens. And then we are going into our check entity count, where we're again looking at current tokens. And here, this is going to be greater than 0 if we had any tokens that met this first filter of being within 1 grid square of the tile. If we don't have any, that's when we go down to error. So going down to error means that we have no more current tokens. We only have triggering tokens. And so to get down to this landing, then in order to interact with the triggering token or triggering player, you need to make sure that it's set to triggering as opposed to current, because the current is 0. We can also expand this a little bit by, instead of checking the entity count of the current tokens, we can check the entities within the triggering tile, and then that check entity count becomes our new set of current tokens, whatever was in this check entity count. So you can use this to also expand or change your array of current tokens beyond or completely separate from your triggering tokens. So that's just an important bit of information to keep straight when you're working with these things, especially if you have filters where you want to have behavior, whether the filter was passed or not, then we need to make sure that we are continuing on no matter what, like we have here with the filter where we're continuing always. And then we also have the appropriate actions and entities set up to actually interact with who we want to interact with. So keep all of this in mind whenever you're working with filters, and it's really easy to get tripped up on at first, but once you've done a little bit of practice and you've seen how it works, it will become very natural to you to understand we need to use triggering versus current. And a lot of times the actions are going to default to things that would be helpful to you anyway. For example, with the show dialog action, by default, it's going to show to the triggering player as opposed to current. So a lot of times the default options are going to suit you pretty well. But just keep this in mind if something isn't working quite right when you're doing filters and you're having results for either the passing of the filter or the failure of the filter. Keep that in mind and make sure to double check those. That's going to conclude today's episode of Automating Foundry with this list of really helpful references and concepts to keep in mind when you're using MATT. Once again, you can get the handy reference tile from our absolutely free Bailiwiki Nuts and Bolts module. Using Mass Edit, you can go into your preset browser and then find it under the MATT tile section of the Bailiwiki Nuts and Bolts prefabs folder. And let us know if you think that tile needs additional information on it, or if there's anything else you'd like to see us add on or expand upon with this tutorial and these concepts. Are there any other actions or ideas with using Monk's active tau triggers that you find yourself referencing all the time or struggling to keep in mind when you're working with MATT. Let us know in the comments and we'll try and do a follow-up in the very near future. Also in the future, keep an eye out for a video going over the nuts and bolts module and all the different tools within it. We don't have just this reference tile in it. We also have a variety of macros and other presets that are super helpful whether you're using our premium content modules or not. And this has been Zephyr with the BaileyWiki channel. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, but you also gain access to all of our modular systems and scenes, like the magic tower levels we showed off today and the various maps that we took a look at. Again, it's been Zephyr with the BaileyWiki channel. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.